Rain indeed. Oh, it's cold way over town. I don't know the lyrics that well to this song. Sup kids, how are you doing today? I'm quite chilly. I've gone suddenly chilly. I've made myself a warm mug of milk, which then I've then put coffee into. So essentially I'm having a homemade latte. If you want to know how to make a homemade latte, quick interference of the podcast to tell you how to make a homemade latte. What you do is you microwave milk a couple of times, usually about 2 minutes, but don't do it for the full 2 minutes. Just do it for a minute, give it a stir, do it for another minute, give it a stir. And then you put a little bit of instant coffee into a cup, and you whip that up with a tiny bit of water just to make it like a paste, and then you pour that paste into the milk and give that a good mix around, and then add sugar to taste. That's how I make a homemade latte, and I'll be honest, it's delicious. I always order a latte when I'm out and about. It's just something I do because I can't make an amazing latte. I can make a serviceable latte. Mainly, basically, I wanted a cup of milk, but I wanted to add coffee to it. But I can make a serviceable latte at home. But when I'm out and about, I order a latte, and I order lattes quite a lot. It's like my go-to drink when I go for coffee, and I go for coffee quite a lot. This is a thing. A lot of essentially what I would say my expenses are is going for coffee. I'm one of them millennials. If I stopped buying coffee, I wouldn't have enough to buy a house. I will point that out. That's not a thing. That's just some ridiculous propaganda. But I do go out for a lot of coffee because I have some disposable income. Because I'm going to cut a long story short here. I've been broke, guys. I've been broke. Been real broke. And don't worry, this isn't one of those, he started at the bottom and look where he is. He, working class, blah, blah, blah. No, it's not that. But I am going to tell you a little bit of a story because I have a point to make, as I always do in my videos. So, when I finished university, and I finished university 10 years ago. When I finished university, I left and I moved back home with my parents, but I didn't move back home straight away. But let's roll this a little bit. So I'm already way out. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my working history. So as kids, we didn't particularly have much money. We weren't what I'd call completely poor. We both my parents worked. They both had jobs, and they were full-time jobs, but both parents had to work in order to support our family. And I guess that's the point I get to, is that we were working class in that sense, that both my parents needed jobs to pay for their house, to pay for having children, which meant as we grew up, we didn't have particularly much money. My dad was a steelworker, and my mum worked at schools. She was originally a dinner lady, and then moved into teaching. Well, not teaching kids. What's called SEN, which is looking after special needs kids, kids with disabilities, bits and bobs like that. And that meant that as we grew up, we didn't have a lot of money as a family. We didn't have all the bells and whistles that a lot of families had. When we had gifts and Christmas presents, and for a while my dad was sick, we had handmade gifts. We had things which my dad had made. I vividly remember, and I still think I have it somewhere. I've got a drawing of Simba from Lion King, which my dad drew for me for one Christmas, and it's drawn on a piece of wallpaper, and it was all I needed at the time. It was some cool little present I got for Christmas, and I hope I have it. I don't know. It was done in pastel, so it may have faded, and I may have had to get rid of it at some point, but that's not the point. But from that, it basically meant that I had a good understanding of money and how money worked and where money came from a very early age, which meant when I went to school, I got a paper round as soon as I could because I wanted the extra income, and I worked whilst I was in college, and college in the UK is when you're like 16, 17, 18, and I went through that period, and I had a job, and I worked as a KP, which is a kitchen porter, where you wash pots, and I moved up to be a cook. And when I went to university, I had money in the sense of I got my loan, but it wasn't enough to cover my rent as well, so I had to work throughout uni, and I worked in bars and I worked in kitchens, and essentially I worked my entire life. It's just a thing which I've always done because I've known I need extra money and I need money to exist in the world, and so I've always done that. It's just been a casual acceptance of I'm never going to have enough money. because our family didn't have money. Now my parents they're at a point where they're comfortable. They're retired now, and they own their house, and they've worked hard their entire lives to do that, and they've been very smart with money to do that, and they taught me how to manage my money, I guess is the point I'm getting at. But what that meant was when I came out of uni, I originally moved in with my brother and moved in with him to work in a bar. I was staying in Lincoln and I needed to get a job because I was like, well, I don't have any money. So I needed to pay bills, and so I moved in with him, paid him rent, and worked a little while there. But it's basically just untenable in terms of living. So I moved back home to live with my parents. And when I was back home, this started what I would call like the period of me figuring out everything in terms of employment and what I wanted to do. So for a while, from moving back home through to moving back to Lincoln with my partner and moving into this place, which we rented together, we were both unemployed and we were on job seekers and claiming housing benefits because we had no money, we had no savings, and we were looking for work. That's what we were doing, and we actively looked for work. So for 2 years, I didn't want to be unemployed, but I couldn't find a job, so I went self-employed and I started my small business through doing that, which I'll discuss on another podcast. But what it's meant is that when I eventually got my full-time job, which I'm still essentially, and I work for the same company, which I have done for 8 years, and I've come into it and I've been very aware of money. I've always been very aware of money, and I've squirreled it away, and I've worked hard to give myself that kind of safety net which is required in order for me to feel comfortable. And when I make decisions about my life, a lot of them base around whether I'll have financial income and what I'm going to do next. So I stack that over and over and over again. Now, that's essentially my story. That's my employment story, which it probably gives you some insight into how I am with the money I have. But what it doesn't really give you insight to is that the story I've just told you of, not having much money early in life, growing up, doesn't reflect necessarily the mainstream media answer to that story, which I'm going to get into. So I got seeing a lot of celebrities recently, and I got reading a lot of stories. And a lot of them came out were just like, yeah, I worked really hard to get here. We had nothing. My parents had nothing, and we were living on the street for a while. And now I'm living in this mansion, and I've got all this money, and I want to really show off my affluence, and I really want to show off how much cash I have, and I want the world to know that I've made it, and this is my reward. And I'm like, okay, this is weird, right? Like, if I got a massive amount of money, like if I got like $1 million or £1 million, and they threw it towards me, I wouldn't live like that. I have no interest in living like that. I think we covered this slightly when we said we were on about never being royal. I have no interest in owning a mansion in any way, shape or form. And I have no interest in, stacks of cash and diamond watches and necklaces and all this kind of stuff. And I don't even have interest in the stuff which I have. I don't have an interest in the premium versions of it. I got looking at art supplies the other day and thinking, I might need to restock some paint. I'm not looking at the high-end paint. I'm looking at what I can buy from Wilko's because it's acrylic. And yeah, it'll work differently, but it's cheaper. And I'm not too fussed about having to work a little hard to make the paint do whatever I want it to do. And I don't know if it's because you get to a point in life where you feel like you don't want to have to work, or you feel like you deserve to just have complete ease. But there was a line from a song by Childish Gambino, and it just said, "Really, are you eating though?" And he's on about people who, hustle and get on and have a lot of money, but their actual amount of money isn't actually that much. And the line is, "Breakfast, lunch, and dinner is for beginners. You don't even know." And I think there's a weird upper level of cash where people are rich and they think, yeah, I've made it and I've got all this money and I can show it off and I can put, diamonds on my eagles and eagles on my mansions. And they're like, yeah, that's money. And you're like, okay, that's money. Yeah, it's money. But it's also a lot of wasted money. It's a lot of pointless money. It's a lot of stuff which if you went bankrupt, people would foreclose on. You can just imagine the IRS walking up your street and the taxman coming in for national insurance company and just knocking on your door and claiming your eagles because you haven't been able to pay your taxes correctly. And a lot of these people do fall down because they don't pay their taxes properly. I'll throw that out there as well. And it raised this question of, there's a weird mentality and within our society that the question isn't necessarily now, are you living rich? Right? When I look at a person, I don't think, how much money do you have? Are you living rich or are you living well? And which is your goal? When you think about your life and when you think about the world around you, when you consider what you actually want from the finances you have, what is your end goal? I know a lot of people who their end goal is affluence, right? I mean, that's financial security, and I can't fault anyone for that. I can't fault anyone for wanting to be financially secure, because it takes a weight off everything. It really, and that's what I want for my friends, right? I want them to be financially secure, that they don't have to worry about rent, and they don't have to worry about where the next paycheck's coming from. What I want for them is complete security. And I can't tell that. But for a lot of people, complete security is just, yeah, I want to be able to buy a car whenever, right? And I want to be able to buy like a fancy car whenever. I'm like, really though? Because I can buy a car. I could buy a car tomorrow, but I don't want to. And I couldn't buy a nice car. It'd be like an absolute wreck and I wouldn't pay more than $1,000 for it. But I don't see that as living rich or living well. I see that as wasting a pile of money. But for some people, that is the goal. It is to be able to waste money rather than utilize money in a way which, I'm not even going to say assists the world, but helps them. How does owning 20 cars help you? It doesn't. All it does is give you more bills, because you're going to have to pay for 20 cars, especially in the UK. You're going to have to have an MOT for any of those cars. You have to pay road tax on all those cars. Essentially, you're just accumulating debt. You got diamonds and your eagles. You're going to have to pay for people to look after your eagles, or your eagles are going to die. You have to pay for insurance on your diamonds. There's the classic stories of rappers and singers out and they get mugged and people steal their diamond necklaces. And you're like, yeah, because you were rocking a diamond on the street. You were just out with this massive chain in public thinking, oh, there's not people who are desperate for cash and completely willing to rip you off. And maybe that's me being cynical. Maybe that's, I don't understand it. And I think, in this conversation we've been having about billionaires and their rides to space, because that's a thing in our current timeline, and how they spend their money, and what's his name, Cameron, flying his submarine underwater. At least with James Cameron, right? As much as I'm not a huge fan or a fanboy or know much about him, I know that when he does his deep sea dives, he does it for research things. He does it to say, oh, we're going to go look at the Titanic, or we're going to as in South Park, we're going to go down and raise the bar. That's someone putting their passion with their money, and yet it's ridiculous that this is the person who's doing it. But there's a lot of scientists and people who are making money out of that because they're being paid well for what they do. When you're just like, yeah, I'm just going to launch myself into space. That's not really for research, is it? We can already launch people into space. That's for your comfort. That's for you to show that you have money to go do those things because you've made it in some way, and you need your ego stroking. If your ego is like a small hamster, you need to go, oh, come here, little hamster. You go, you can feel good about yourself because you're a terrible human being. I don't get how being rich has suddenly become synonymous with adding more crap to your life. I have no interest in living rich, and this is going to sound like, oh, look at me, look, I'm so humble. I have no interest in being rich. I have no interest in being godly and having the world worship me, because everyone has a level of wanting their ego stroked. But I don't think my ego is going to get stroked by me having a nice car. I think my ego would get stroked by someone looking at how I live my life and going, is he living well? Is he comfortable? Has he got enough to eat? Does he own his house? Does he, have a car which is in a fair, condition that he can go around and do whatever he wants, perhaps? Or, is the investments he's making actually, helping the community he lives in some way? That's something which I always find fascinating, is you get rich people who move to gated communities and then they just throw money at other communities like that solves the problem. That doesn't solve the problem, especially because usually they get thrown to charities which might not necessarily have the resources and the training to deal with the issue at hand. And that's no shade on charities. There is a lot of fantastic charities out there. But the solution isn't just going, oh, here's 10 grand, go solve the problem. The solution is getting involved. You managed to put together a business or a product which made you enough money that you can go do that. Why not lend your advice? Why not lend your expertise and your resources? That's going to be more effective than 10 grand. Isn't it? There's a flight of fantasy idea in my head that one day I'll have enough money to essentially try and help just the world outside, but help it in such a way where I'm not just funding somebody, I'd help it in such a way that I'm not funding someone in the sense of I'm just giving you a loan or I'm giving you free money, but more in the sense of I'm helping you get a stable footing, which I didn't have, and I've had to slowly build up by helping you skip the line, helping you go from one thing or another. And that's, again, I'm trying to avoid this idea of being someone's savior because I don't want to be that. There's a dignity which you get by helping yourself, but not everybody is able to help themselves. So you've got to step in and say, hey, we can help. We can, there's no shame in asking for help either, by the way. Just, I've asked for help. I've been on job seekers. I've been on benefits. I've asked for help because at the time I needed it and I didn't want to put a financial drain on my parents who worked their lives to get to the point where they're at. Now, if you have an institution of private citizens who are willing to funnel money back into their community, then everyone can help. And everyone can have a much more stable footing. And that seems way more important than trying to live rich in some capacity just to say you're living rich. It's almost mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling to think. I had a conversation ages ago with a couple of friends of mine. I can't remember what we'd been to do. I think we'd been to see a friend's art show. Let me just take a sip of my latte. Where it kind of got revealed to me in a conversation that I almost don't like being associated with the idea of money either. And this is something like a prejudice which I know a lot of people have when they've come from backgrounds similar to mine. We don't like to be associated with money. We don't like people with money. I have a thing against rich people. If you watch this podcast, it's basically just me rambling about rich people. But we had this kind of conversation, and because I have a full-time job and because I've been working for a few years, I managed to give myself a little nest egg. Obviously I live alone, that's a cost, but I'm able to live alone, and I have a car, and that's a cost, but I'm able to have a car, and at the same time I do have enough disposable income that I'm going for lattes on a regular basis and I'm not thinking about it. Now that, to me, is living well. I could live weller in the sense of I could own this house, and I could, not have any student loans or debts or anything like that, which I do have, but that would be living well. But I live well in the sense of I can buy a latte literally whenever I want a latte. I can go out and get one. And we had this conversation, and to them, you could describe me as middle class. Now, I kind of took offense to that. I kind of took offense to being called middle class. And I did it to my mum as well. And we had this conversation where I was like, well, you're middle class now because you own your home, you have your income, and you're retired. You're basically living middle class. And she took offense to it as well. And I was like, oh, well, you came back from a slightly further rough background than I did. And you take offense to being called middle class. And it's almost like it's ingrained into you to just, reject that as soon as you get it. So even when you kind of got a point where you do have financial stability, you're like, yeah, well, I don't want to be called middle class and it's because we've had this impression of people above us in finance, not people above us in the sense of they're better people, but better in terms of, they're living better. The attitude they have by living, as they would put it, well, is adapted by living frivolously, by living rich, not living well. These are people who have lived rich and they've gotten used to living rich and having, nice coats and the best cars and the best, hats, as it were, and, cake made of seals. I don't know. I was trying to think of something really expensive there. For some reason, cake made of seals came to my brain. And I imagine that would be expensive because I don't think anyone breeds seal for food. Maybe Eskimo? Like Inuit people? I don't know. That's a question for the wider world. But this is the impression we've got. I mean, that's because that's what the media gives us. That's what the media gives us. That's what rich people do. That's what people with disposable income do, is they live rich rather than living well. Wouldn't it be better if we lived well? What if every person who got to a point where they were comfortable tried to funnel some of that comfort back into progress rather than back into profit? This is the conversation a lot of kind of people who lean towards conservative and centrist attitudes have, is that, oh, well, we shouldn't tax people who are making more profit because the profit's meant to go back into the business, which generates more job. It's like, right, that only works if when they're doing that, they're paying the people who are making the profit the correct wage. You know, if their business is based on the idea of underpaying an employee, therefore they make profit so they can expand their business, that's not a business. That's a charity with, minions. That's a sweatshop. That's not a successful business. If you can't make profit by paying your staff a decent wage, you don't have a company at all. You're just maintaining something. You have a business name, and that's it. You've got a scam. And I think there's a whole anti-work movement which is going on at the minute, which I'm loving unfold. And I think I said it at the podcast at the very beginning of the year. I'm loving watching this unfold because these, you're going to use the term yuppies, who own these entrepreneurial businesses, are realizing, so, well, no one's going to work for you if you don't value them, are they? You're okay to make profit. You're okay to make money. But you've got to funnel it back. You've got to. You've got to find ways of doing it. And I think I try to find ways of doing it. In the sense of, I launched the Null Point Initiative, which, if you don't know, is on my zine website. And if you need printing, if you need some way to kind of get your artwork out there, you should go check it out. It's at nullpoint.org, because there's a little financial nest egg which I put aside to help people who need it. It's just, go out of your way and find it and send me your ideas, and I'll look into it. And same way of, like, whenever I kind of produce something, I'll put something out into the world. Most of the time, if I can, I'll try and make it free. When I do my products, I want to make them reasonable. I want to make them purchasable. I want to make them accessible to people so they can get a better product for a price which they can afford. I've no interest in living rich. I've got an interest in living well. And living well to me is really kind of simple. There's not many wants I have from life. Maybe that's just me, I don't know. I'd like to see it adapted more. I'd like to see more people working along them lines and allowing themselves to live well, and focusing less on the celebrities and public figures who are living rich. I think is a key in recognizing people who are living rich and going, okay, they're living rich. I'm not interested in their story anymore. This is the whole thing with influencers on Instagram, is they're people who live rich. They're not people who live well. And it's up to us to recognize that and essentially send a message to say, well, we're not interested in people who live rich. We're interested in a society of people living well, and everybody trying to live well and being able to. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I feel like I just rambled and just said that I don't want to be rich for 20 minutes. Maybe I'm dooming myself. I'd rather live broke than have diamond encrusted eels. I know that. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.